Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are so excited to have you join us for our very first Hemp How-To webinar. And today's topic is going to be on the integration of nutrient and pest management. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I am the Director of Marketing here at Zera Hemp Labs. Zera Hemp Labs is an innovative online solution, and we connect hemp producers with accrediting testing laboratories nationwide to ensure fast, easy, and accurate hemp tests. So this webinar series is designed to provide resources and information on a variety of critical topics that have to do with the wonderful world of hemp, including cultivation, extraction, product manufacturing, wholesale regulations, and more. So we are also busy behind the scenes creating just a ton of great written content, and we have just now released our 2021 Hemp Farmers Calendar. So a really great resource that we have available for everybody. This is really designed for people. So this is a bulletin with a Google Calendar. It also can come as a printable PDF if you like to see things at a glance. This is a super valuable resource for people who are either new to growing hemp, or you want to up-level your growing game, or if you really just want a reference or an easy-to-follow guide for what's going on in your region in the coming season. So after the webinar today, I will send a follow-up email for everybody with information on how you can get your free guide. So before we begin, some housekeeping items. We're going to be here for about a 45-minute session or so, more or less. We are recording this presentation, but so that if you do have to drop, you can definitely access it later, and we'll post it up on our YouTube channel. You can find it there. We will save some time at the end for your questions, but please feel to jump into the Q&A, which it looks like people are already doing. The chat's already popping, so that's great. And we will get everything addressed just as soon as we can. So on to the main event. I am very excited today to have Emily Gogol here with me. Emily is a Ph.D. She is a founder and CEO of Infinite Tree, which is an agricultural research and development firm in southern Oregon. Southern Oregon. You're way over on the other side of the country. All right. Well, it's a smaller country today. It feels like a little bit. So as a scientist and a business leader, Emily enjoys the rapidly changing, highly regulated cannabis and hemp industries, as we all do. She is passionate about growing the next generation of quality plants, which we know is so desperately needed. Right now, she emphasizes responsible, sustainable practices that are developed through scientific research. All the good things, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
This is wonderful. Okay, well, I will let you take it away. I know we've got a lot to learn today.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for the intro. So yeah, I'm Emily. I run Infinite Tree. I just want to remind everyone, totally ask questions. I come from a science background. I'm used to getting stopped in the middle of a lecture to answer a hard question. So please, if you have a question, use the chat, and then I can see that, and I'd be happy to answer your question in real time. I know this is over Zoom, but I'm happy to make this as dynamic and interactive of a lecture as possible, so that I answer your questions when they come up. So with that, I'm going to share my screen so you see my slides. So I'll see you guys on the other side. I'll be talking at you from my slides. So I'm going to share them now, and please remember to ask questions. Oop, you've got to enable my screen sharing. Let's see here. So while Kalia is working on that, I'll just tell you a little bit more about our work that might help frame your questions. So Infinite Tree is a USDA organic certified hemp farm that specializes in creating and producing and distributing new craft hemp flower varietals. So we focus just on craft hemp flower from a breeding perspective. And we do everything from the breeding work to commercial seed production to nursery production to get those plants out to folks across the US. So if you have any questions about selecting the right cultivar for your farm, or more like detailed ag questions about like when to plant and how to plant and how many varieties maybe you should be looking at, happy to get to those questions today. But today's talk is going to focus more high level on things like agronomic guidelines for hemp and the big picture on pests and disease. It's really about looking at everything that comes onto your farm, what practices you have in place for yourself, your team, and what kind of checks and balances are happening during your production cycle throughout the whole year to manage pests and disease. So it's not about Like, okay, salt marsh caterpillar. How do I get salt marsh caterpillar? Okay, corn worms. Like, how do I get those? Or like fusarium. Like, it's not so much. Those are all very important diseases and pests and hemp, but it's really about putting in procedures and best practices that allow you to monitor so that when you do find that you have a problem, you can address it with some sort of standardized protocol. That's really the best thing. I'm going to talk mostly about that today, as opposed to like a laundry list of, well, apply this product and don't apply that product.
What about this? What about that?
Yeah. So
yeah, you should be good to be able to share now. Yeah, can you get it okay?
Yeah. Love it. It is there. Okay, perfect. Okay. Present. Okay, hi. So I'm Emily. I run Infinite Tree. We talked about this. We already talked about what we do here. So again, we're research and development and nursery specialists from soup to nuts. So I'd love questions around that. And today's workshop, we're going to go over some agronomic guidelines for hemp, the big picture for pest and disease on your farm, and then go more in detail on some cultural controls and best practices. Because that's really where you're going to spend most of your time and your money and your effort, is to make sure those procedures are in place so that when something does happen, you can respond quickly to it and appropriately for your production scheme. So first, a little bit about planting and cultivation when I get into the agronomics of hemp. The important factors are timing. So you need to know your site. If you're new to farming in your area, talk to other farmers. Hemp isn't, as a row crop, it's not different really than any other row crops that people are growing in your area. So talk to them about what they have observed, the things that work well for them. Comprehensive planning is important for hemp, just like it is for any other row crop, whether you're doing 1 acre or you're doing 1,000 acres. It just gets more complex the higher acreage you go, really. So think about your scale, like how much you can really farm this year, both in terms of getting plants in the ground and then how you're going to get that flower material out of the ground and dried and processed in a way that makes sense at that scale. So going from doing a 5-acre grow to a 25-acre grow is not just a 5-fold increase. There's a lot of things that change as you scale up. And it's important to think about that before you even start your season every year, even if you're doing the same acreage. What are we going to do differently? Think about your methods. How are you planting? How are you cultivating? What's your weed suppression strategy look like this year versus last year? And then harvest. Are you going to hire someone to do that work, or are you doing that in-house? So these are all just big picture things that you need to think about before you even before you put a plant in the ground, before you purchase a seed or a plant. Then there's irrigation. So knowing your site in terms of whether areas flood or not, because hemp is very sensitive to wet feet. And I'll talk more in detail about like water and nutrient requirements for hemp as they stand right now, our understanding as a new row crop. And then hemp pests, I'll get into that. So these are all areas, like big picture areas, that you need to think about deeply before you decide whether you're going to buy a certain cultivar or not for your farm. And I'll say, just as a reminder too, like this is a customer feedback quote from one of our folks in Oregon, who was really impressed with Florence, one of our old varieties, hardly any transplant shock, and after 1.5 weeks shop immensely. I just include this as a reminder that it's really important as you're going through this planning process to think about all of your inputs, whether it's the seeds or plants you purchase, the fertilizer you use, the labor you maybe hire, you hire to come onto your farm to work. We all try to cut corners, but you have to, it's a real balance, because I talked to so many folks that if they put in a product like a plant that's not healthy because they cut a corner by leaving it in a greenhouse too long and it's terrible, it's not going to succeed. And in the same way, if your irrigation, your pressure isn't right in your irrigation because you didn't double check it and like hire a good company to do it, or do it yourself the right way, like it just, the problems build. So cutting corners early in the season will just keep leading to like more problems later on. So really try to focus on planning ahead to get the best quality like plan or product in place early. It will save you so many headaches later on. And we'll talk about those headaches. So soil preparation and plant spacing depends on where you are in the country. Again, talk to your neighbors who do row crop farming and know your farm. If it's your first year farming, raised beds and black plastic is never a bad way to go if you can spare the expense. in many parts of the country, depending on where you're farming, due to weed pressures. You've got to put down plastic because the weed pressure is so intense. It really depends. So you see on the left, there's raised beds with black plastic. On the right, there are just rows of hemp plants with their drip irrigation in a cultivated field. I will just say, people have some opinions on like plastic versus not. I think from what I read, it's really about your site, your region that you grow in, your weed pressure, and then how much rain you get, those kind of things. There really isn't a better way for hemp yet. I can't say that like open soil on the right versus raised beds and plastic on the left is technically better. It really depends on your region and like how much you want to put into weed suppression, basically. But you can absolutely do both. So I just want to point that out. Plant spacing is dependent on the cultivar you're growing. Generally, hemp likes a little more room than other row crops. So typically, if your plant tops out at about 5 to 6 feet, you want to have about a 4 to 5 foot spacing around that plant on center. It's really about looking at your field and deciding like the acreage you need to grow and the density per acreage based on conversations with your plant breeder. And they should be able to answer that question for you easily, but there's no like magic formula for hemp in terms of spacing. It's generally determined by the width and height of your plants, and your breeders should have that information. Fertility. So hemp is new in a sense to being grown legally in the United States at scale. And every year in different parts of the country, trials are happening, and we're learning more and more about the NPK requirements for this row crop. So this is our current understanding that our team has developed from both research that we've done on site and collaborations with other agronomists who work around the country to develop these guidelines. So our current recommendations for nutrient levels are given here. What I want to say is it's important that you get just like other row crops, that you get all of these amendments in early. You want to get them in prior to planting, give them time to start breaking down, especially if you're, depending on the amendments you're using, like we're an organic farm. So some of the things that we use take longer to break down than others to get to these levels. So you really want to prepare your field fully before plants go in terms of pH and NPK and everything. And we don't really recommend fertilizing throughout the season. There are different schools of thought on this, but our experience has shown that getting the field topped up to where it needs to be and then letting the plants pull up those nutrients, get the water and the sun throughout summer leads to a good flower crop. You don't need to treat it like indoor grown marijuana where you're constantly fish emulsioning, everything like it's a hydroponic crop or something, like you don't need to do that with field grown hemp. As long as your field is up to par. And these guidelines change every year. We update them based on our experience, but this is where our starting recommendation is. So look to greenhouse crops like tomatoes, canola, hops, and corn, as in they're like warmer weather crops that are grown outdoors as row crops for both the micronutrients, and then always send soil samples to a lab. I talk to a lot of farmers who don't think like you've got to send soil samples off, and take them from multiple places in your field. If you're growing on 5 acres, you need to sample 5 acres, because unless you're really comfortable with the history of your farm and you've been sampling every year and you're confident that the field is very even, you might have an acre craft flower production just because you didn't test that acre before the season started. You can't go back on that. So it's important to do this testing. It costs $100 to get testing done, but it will save you so much headache on the other end if you're sure your field is up to par, because adding back nutrients when you have plants in the ground is much more challenging and usually much more expensive and more risky. So please consider doing soil testing up front, and then utilize tissue tests early mid-season to make sure everything is going well, and that if you need to add additional amendments, through fertigation or a side dressing or something, you can do that. Irrigation and cultivation. The first 30 days for hemp are critical. These plants, as many of you probably know, grow really fast. Their water demand can be quite high, and you have to have weed suppressed in order for them to get up and get enough sun and get big. So during the first 30 days, water demand for hemp is about 25 inches. But remember, hemp does not like wet feet anywhere in the country. Whether you're growing on sand or clay, it does not like wet feet. It can generally tolerate a 50% depletion in available soil moisture. So the amount of water you need to apply is dependent on your soil's moisture holding capacity, but really keeping it like getting down to 50% before you water again, we found with most clients prevents a ton of problems. People tend to overwater hemp. They think it's like they're growing watermelons. I don't know. Like they want to give it so much water. I think so much more water, more nutrients, more water. And what it leads to is fungal diseases, and you start getting wilting, dying plants. So by overwatering, it's better to underwater hemp. That's what I'm saying. And we found a 50% depletion in soil moisture, regardless of your soil type, is important. Drip systems can be laid under the soil before planting or above ground using drip tape or drip tubing. You may increase nutrient efficiency with fertigation if you choose to fertigate over the summer, but it's not, in our experience, necessary if your field is properly amended. And whether you're using drip or overhead, it's just a setup. We don't really on returns in terms of like overhead versus drip for hemp as a crop yet. So it depends on whether you have the equipment on your farm and you want to use it. From what we've seen. Cultivation, weed pressure is huge. Take care not to cover or damage seedlings with soil. They are pretty sensitive in the first couple weeks. When you cultivate with a tractor, multiple shallow passes early on to suppress weeds and avoid root injury is important. Initially, it's very shallow rooted, and the plants don't always develop like a super deep root structure depending on your soil type in your area. I mean, hopefully they do. That's the idea. They should, but farms are different. So we really recommend, if you are doing cultivation mechanically, just remember the root structure beneath the plant, and be careful, and allow for water on the soil surface to dry out before cultivating. That will help a lot, because cracking is like a really big problem for soil and hemp. You don't want to like kill off your seedlings accidentally. So those are transitioning now to like the big picture we've talked a bit about nutrient management and best practices in terms of cultivation. When it comes to pests and disease, the big picture really is, it's not so much the pest or disease, but the practices you have in place. So look in your region, what have farmers been experiencing the last couple of years, your environment. Prevention, what kind of monitoring do you have? Is it a single person that walks your fields? Or do you have moth traps and sticky cards and, pheromone traps set around your farm so that you can start seeing what's flying around before it causes economic injury to your crop? So prevention is key. And you do that by the next bullet point, which is monitoring. So making sure you get ahead of things. And then treatment. So being able to assess your crop and say, if I'm able to treat, how do I treat? And does it make sense economically for me to do it at this stage? Like, for example, in the last week of flower, there's not a lot you can put on your plants to save them because you're about to harvest that flower, and it will not pass your inspection if it comes back with pesticides and other things on it. So it's important to get ahead of these issues with the prevention and monitoring before you even get to the treatment stage, because you may not have the option to treat. So it's better to focus on prevention and monitoring. We just want to point out Katie Garrison. She's an entomologist that was fantastic. She used schools to develop their mite program. So hemp russet mites are a big passion project of hers in hemp. She's a fantastic entomologist with a lot of unique knowledge for how to treat row crops. So if you want to get in touch with Katie for more specific consultation on your farm, just let me know. I just want to say I want to thank Katie for a lot of the work that she's done with us at Infinite Tree to develop our big picture plan and our particular SOPs. So hemp pests, just as kind of a reminder, because hemp has only recently been legalized, most EPA registered pesticides do not permit use on hemp. So please be careful when you're using different products. They may not be listed and you might get in trouble for using them. So just as a reminder, so here in Oregon, the Oregon Department of Ag, like many other departments in other states, has a guide list for pests and cannabis, which you should consult before using pesticides to determine which ones you can legally use. It's a good place to start. So definitely check your own university extension resources. They're fantastic. They typically can be fantastic. They may not have a lot posted on hemp, but you should at least give them a call and say hi and see what information they do have for you that say, well, we don't have it for hemp, but you can use this. And here's how we know how it works in your area on tomatoes or corn. And they're a huge wealth of information. So lots of traditional farmers have used their extension programs for decades. Hemp farmers, we should do the same. Colorado State University has a really robust program, and you can find their sort of catch-all list and facts, like fact sheets on different pests at that link. So I'm not going to go into detail on specific pests, but there is information out there, and it's getting better every year. So the main thing is prevention. So timing, start early and stay on top of it with monitoring and regular releases or sprays. Use pesticides with multiple modes of action if possible. When you're doing acreage, you don't want to be out there spraying 10 different things that can't be tank mixed, and have to go on separately. It just gets expensive. And then think about biodiversity. What are the challenges in your area? Are there any other people growing hemp nearby? Do you have any perennial cover that's for beneficials and birds nearby? Or do you have no birds on your property and you want to get them on your property so they can start eating pests? Every farm is different, but think about creating that biodiversity to help keep pest pressure down around your hemp crops. Animals are pests of hemp. Gophers can be a huge problem. Fungal pathogens, there are many. Very similar issues to viticulture. So if grapes were grown in your area, in your farm before, and they have a lot of fungal issues, you might have them again in your hemp. In Oregon, there was a huge loss, up to 50%, caused by botrytis in 2019. Crown rot is an issue in hemp. Sprays of things like sulfur, actinomyces, potassium bicarb, hydrogen peroxide, depending on your scale, neem oil, like all of these things can be used. It's really about developing a plan so that when you start seeing a fungal issue early, that you can treat it, because you don't necessarily want to be using these things at the end. It's not going to give you a big benefit. Insects, everything from hemp russet mites, so tiny microscopic things, spider broadcyclium mites that can be treated with sulfur, to things like aphids, thrips, cucumber beetles, ligus, where diatomaceous earth and other insecticides can be helpful, to soil-dwelling pests like symphylands, which is nearly impossible to get rid of from what we've seen. Nematodes, slugs, common slugs, root aphids. I just point these things out to say that there are many. You need to be looking on the leaves, under the leaves, the crown of the plant, in your soil. Before plants even go in, you can be looking at whether or not your farm has symphylands. Do you see big patchy areas in your crop last year? Do you see symphylands when you check the soil in the spring? You can figure out these things before plants even go in the ground, and then either adjust your expectations for that season or put plans in place to monitor aggressively and potentially treat. So the best thing are cultural controls and best practices. So intake procedures is big. If you're getting plants from other people, quarantine is important. Our nursery does a ton of work to make sure that our plants that go out are healthy and happy and are disease-free, but not every nursery has as many protocols in place as we do to make sure of that in hemp. So definitely quarantine your plants, check them out. Know when they were last sprayed with something and whether they need a follow-up spray before they go in the field. Talk to your provider. Destructive sampling can be important if you're maintaining crops over the winter, like for a nursery project. Sprays and dunks, the soil. So everything that you bring in should be tested. If you're getting soil delivered from offsite or compost or other inputs, like make sure it is what the manufacturer says it is and that it's pest and disease free. Make sure when someone brings a tractor onto your farm that it's clean and they don't have a history of symphylands on their property. Simple things like that keep pests like symphylands out of your soil that you never want to get, but that are easy to transfer. So think carefully about the farm equipment you bring on your property, the plants, the people in their shoes, whether or not they're allowed in your field. And when in doubt, don't let them in your field, or make them clean their equipment or their shoes before they enter. Just like we have to do for organic. If I borrow someone's tractor who's not organic, I have to show that it's been cleaned thoroughly. And that whole procedure works great for keeping pests of the soil out of your farm. More on cultural controls and best practices, movement of people and things. If you have other crops that you're growing on your farm or other operations and staff are moving between them, and you've got a big outbreak of fusarium in your poinsettia greenhouse, like, don't put that material by your hemp crop. Don't have staff that were working in the fusarium infested greenhouse then go do your male checks, check for males in your fields. That's how you spread disease. So make sure that staff work in clean areas first and then move clean to dirty. So if you have an area that doesn't have any present pest or disease, have staff work there first and then go to the areas that have pest and disease. And then when they end their day, they get clean, they come back to work clean. If staff and tools do need to move between facilities that have different pest pressures, have a dedicated set of tools or for each area, or shoes, have them change boots in between working in the greenhouse versus going out in the field. That really stops the cycle of disease. So think about your staff, how they move, your supplies. So whether you have equipment that works different fields that you need to clean in between, your greenhouses, how are they maintained and monitored? And again, your tools. So that's important. Continuous monitoring. So you should be, from before your plants go in the ground, you should be checking your soil, putting up traps to check for insects before plants even go in. And then after plants go in, you need to monitor for different diseases. So it doesn't have to be this like huge scientific data-driven endeavor. It's as simple as doing a random walk or a zigzag pattern, it's also called, around your field. So you just randomly stop at different plants throughout your field and check them for diseases and pests and see how they're doing. Be random, not choosy. Don't say, oh, that's the biggest plant, I'm going to check the big plants. Check random plants. That's how you're going to find stuff. Bring a Ziploc bag with you at all times so that if you do see something that's suspicious, pop it in the bag. You can send that off to your extension program to ID, or you can take a photo of it then when you get back to the house and look on the internet. So always keep a Ziploc bag with you when you do these walks so you can pop something into it. And if you need to, like a cooler for storage, but it's not necessary for most things unless you're like taking a sample to send to a lab and they ask you to do it. Just point out, if you do want to look at microscopic pests to see if like your hemp russet mite population is there and getting bigger, there are simple filter-based protocols for doing that. It doesn't have to be you and a microscope in a dark room for an entire Saturday to make sure your leaves are clean. So we have methods that are very simple that involve taking a lot of leaves, basically washing them with alcohol and then filtering that wash to see all the bugs that are in it at different sizes. So this just kind of goes over the details on the slide, but really my point is that you don't have to have a microscope and look at every single leaf to do this. There are filter-based protocols where you can batch huge amounts of leaves, wash them, and then look at the pests that come up. So you can find everything, thrips to tiny, tiny hemp russet mites pretty easily on acreage using this protocol. And I'm happy to talk to folks about this after the lecture. So it doesn't have to be a crazy science project. And the data analysis as well. Keep it simple. Just record the date of the occurrence, the site, which field was it in, maybe which row, depending on how your field is laid out. What the cultivar, so like the variety of the strain, like are your, box plants showing up with 10 out of 100 have sclerotinia, whereas your auto 2 plants right next door have no sclerotinia? And is that a function of the box hybrid versus the auto 2 or your soil? Because they're distinct soil areas on your farm. Noting these kind of things will help you track down problems. And simple presence or absence count, are thrips present? Are thrips not present? You don't have to get like an accurate count of everything, but knowing that they're spread throughout your field and they're there is better than not knowing and helps you set the level of treatment. So data analysis, simple. Date, site, where you saw it, so the type of cultivar. And then is it simply presence or absence, or do you really want to do a count? Usually presence or absence is fine. So that was it for today's workshop. I talked a bit about some hemp guidelines, some agronomic focused information for everyone that we've found over the years to be very helpful, and like every year gets updated. I've talked about the big picture for pest and disease. It's really about way before plants go on the ground, knowing your site and monitoring and setting up monitoring, and then keeping up on it while plants are in the ground. And then I've talked about some ideas around cultural controls and best practices for moving people and tools and plants in and out around your farm throughout the season. So with that, I'd love to take any questions you guys have. And you can reach me either at my email address here, emily@infinite-tree.com, or by phone. My phone number is listed, and happy to chat with folks and, of course, help you out this season, because if farmers are successful, I'm happy, and it just moves the industry forward. So I love talking with folks. We're very hands-on with our clients. We serve mostly boutique craft flower growers, and we really spend the time to work with them. I'm not, when you call me to order plants, I really work with you. It's not just you get your shipment. I expect to hear from you throughout your season. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions, and thank you so much for that presentation. That's such helpful information, and I love to hear that you're so passionate about helping the industry grow, because it's so new and it's so volatile, and I think that the work you're doing is just really commendable. So awesome. Okay, so we do have our first question coming in. It says, does your company have the seed certification sign-off referenced in the new FDA regs? Or can you tell us about how to know that you're purchasing stable genetics?
The seed certification sign-off.
Sign-off. Yep, referenced in the new FDA regs.
Well, I think so. It's state by state in terms of how seed is regulated. So Oregon, so the ODA, so we operate in Oregon. Okay, that's where our research facility and production farm are located. That's a great question. So all of our seed is certified by the state of Oregon, and that's how we achieve our certification. In terms of stable genetics, there isn't any. Maybe the person asking the question knows more than me about this, but my understanding is that there aren't currently any benchmarks for what is, quote, stable genetics in hemp in terms of a phenotypic trial. Like, you have to grow out 10 acres and then someone inspects your field and does a variety analysis for quote, stability. If there's a program like that, I'd love to participate in it. We do so much research around that. I love doing that research, but as far as I know, there isn't a certification around, quote, genetic stability. Maybe you're referring to hermaphrodite rate or feminization rate, which I'm happy to talk about. Let's see. Yeah. So, and then I guess to follow up on that, can you tell us about how to know that you are purchasing stable genetics? So in terms of a certification, I don't know of one. Talk to your breeder. When I have conversations with our clients, it's all about how these lines were developed, what I've observed in the field, what our variety trial partners have observed in the field. Ask questions around how many years has this been grown? It's shocking to me how many breeders will make a cross from two parents they know are good, and then they'll sell it the next year without even trialing it. Like they've never actually grown the offspring. People operate with this very odd sense of how breeding works that doesn't happen. You would never release a zinnia to the market, that was like that. So not only are the parents good, like that's nice, but the breeder needs to talk to you about the actual product you're buying, the cross that you're buying, whatever that thing is. Where was it grown? What testing did you do on it? What was the variation in CBD percent or height or maturation time? Is 10% of the population green and 90% purples? What's the terpene profile like? Is it 75% strong pine notes with 25% more floral notes, which is fine. That's still a great craft flower product, but these are the kind of questions your breeder should be able to answer, because that means they're paying attention to what's in their field and why they're moving forward with it. So to me, stable genetics is really defining the level of homogeneity in your field. How much variation do you want? If you want all plants that are 6 feet tall, identical terpene profiles, identical CBD percentages, having the right cultivar that is known to perform that way from seed or is important. But there's also some environmental variation that happens. Whereas I think right now the way the bar is like, how terrible is your hermaphrodite rate? Maybe that's what you're referring to. And some breeders sell plants that have a very high hermaphrodite rate or a very uneven maturation profile. So half your field is ready before the other half, which may not necessarily work for you, especially if you didn't know that was going to be the case going into it. And your crew isn't coming until a week later, So I think it's really about talking with your breeder. And if they can't sufficiently answer your questions, then you might want to work with someone else.
Yeah. And that's actually, it's a good point, and it comes up often enough. We've actually just produced a blog about using some of this time in the off season to help, like the beginner's guide to hemp genetic selection. Like, you have a little bit of time right now. It might not be a bad idea to grow some of these plants at least far enough to be able to see what it is that you're dealing with,
Yeah, the idea. Yeah, that's a great. So we work with farmers to provide trials. Depends on your acreage. We kind of scale with our trial program with different farmers, but grow it the year before on a small acreage, like a small part of your farm, grow it. If you like it, then buy it in quantity for a major production the following year. In hemp, we haven't had that luxury because every year new stuff comes out and we all want the new thing. So we all take, everyone takes chances, and then I hear stories about those chances. So, like I said, we try to work with farms to provide them with trials the year before. If it's material, it's every year. But then they also are welcome to come to the trials we have on our own farm. Because like I said, we don't release something until it's been extensively trialed. So they can always come see it here the summer before. Some people are doing light depths earlier in the year. So they'll light dep it. Depending on your climate and your farm, you might light dep the material over the winter. And then do it on significant acreage that summer. So some people are starting to do that to get kind of a jump on the market. But it is a challenge, but you do not want to put something in the ground that you are not confident about. You need to grow with confidence because you cannot go back. Once it's in the ground, you cannot double your yield, change the craft flower you're producing in its terpene profile. There's no product that's going to do that for you after the plants are in the ground. It is what it is. So spend the most time and money there, in my opinion.
Yeah,
that's their questions.
Super valuable. Yeah, I have another question here. So it's funny what you talk about. You just talked about double down on production, right? So let's talk about, let's say somebody had a really good year in 2020 and they produced a really nice crop. How would you advise that they move forward? Should they double down on production? Should they double down on quality? How should they go?
Yeah, I think if you're in the craft flower market, what I recommend is it's very challenging to grow 50% more hemp. In terms of your cultivation practices, the plants that you use, like adding 50% yield is tricky. We don't really have it's hard to know when a breeder tells you that your yield is going to be 50% more than somebody else's, like cultivar X versus cultivar Y. Cultivar Y is going to produce 50% more than X. It's hard for me. Usually that data is not very robust and they haven't grown X and Y together in the same farm. They just kind of say, oh yeah, my plant's 2 pounds of smokable flower. And you're like, cool. So it's really hard to increase your yield right now with hemp. You can increase your yield with hemp, but it's hard to know definitively if you buy X product, you're going to get Y yield, especially if you're comparing products from different people. So if you're comparing products from different breeders, it's really hard to say like one's going to be 50% more yield than the other. It's tricky. Whereas increasing your acreage, you can get 50% more yield if you just plant more plants, right? But that's a lot of work and expense. And at the end of the day, it's still farming. I always say start with your distributor, start with your buyer, because making sure you're producing whatever will get the top dollar, you can it's much better to sell for 50%, sell your product at 50% more than to grow 50% more hemp. So we all are farmers though. So I would say we always want to just grow bigger, better plants or more acreage, but really focus on your sales relationship, because getting your sales team in order to get a better price point for that flower is going to give you the best returns. Growing more hemp is not necessarily going to get you more money. So I would say double down on quality and conversations with your sales team and buyers so that you can get them the highest price point flower. That's how you're going to make the most money.
Yeah, that's a solid answer. We hear that a lot too. People are, I think that there could be a whole nother webinar on the sales team aspect of this whole thing, because we do hear often enough, people are like, now what? I grew this beautiful plant. Here it is, world, and what do I do with it next? And so, you know, I think there's more conversation to be had around that part. So another question, does your company offer a pest prevention plan?
We are available for consulting. We do some consulting. The entomologist we work with is also available. We honestly just work with our clients really closely to make sure they're supported. We don't have like a standalone like plan. But I'd be happy to talk to you after, you know, send me an email, give me your information. I'll be in touch and we'll see what we can do to help your farm.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. All right. Well, I think we can just about wrap it up here. I don't have any more questions coming in. So of course, thank you so much for sharing, you know, these knowledge bombs with us. This is really, really valuable information. I know a lot of the people that are listening today, maybe they're new growers or they're just interested in getting into growing hemp. And I think some of this information that you've shared is super valuable. So as a final reminder, if anybody is looking for high CBD, USDA certified, organic, feminized hemp seedlings, you can totally reach out to Emily and her stellar team. They have 72 count trays that they ship nationally in discreet professional packaging. I cannot think of a reason why you wouldn't want to reach out to these folks to be able to pick their brains. And then the consulting that you mentioned going forward, like we do, I mean, because the industry is so new and because everybody's trying to kind of figure it out all at once, that's immensely valuable to have somebody that you can go to ask questions and that can be there as kind of the ear to borrow, or, you know, to send a picture to, or like, what am I looking at here? So thank you so much for sharing that with us. A final reminder from the Zera Hemp Labs team, if you haven't already, please visit us at zerahemplabs.com. Check out our library of free resources on all things hemp. Like we talked about, well, of course, you know, we're on social, so if you're there, we can find you there. And of course, if you have any hemp that needs to get tested, we are always here for that as well. I will send everybody a follow-up with a link so that you can access the regionally specific version of the 2021 Farmers Calendar. And I'll also include a super short survey so that you can give us your feedback on how you like this first session. And if there's anything specific that you'd like to hear of in the future, we would love to be able to craft this. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. Thank you, Emily. It's a big day any way you look at it. So be well, everybody.
Great.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
so much. You too. Bye, everybody.
Okay.